don't tell me your poem, show me your poem. And I should know where your poem is at by your body presence, just the presence of your body and what is happening in your articulation without the content, without the words. So I always think about it as when I'm sharing a poem, I'm not just reading a poem, I'm inviting someone into the moment, and I invite them into the moment through the use of things like dynamics and pausing and pacing and rhythm and breath, which I think the only way you really get to those things is the out loud practice.
So welcome back to Speaker Driven Business Podcast. And in this episode, I'm really excited because I'm speaking with one of my favorite humans. Welcome, Joel McKerrow.
Oh, that's lovely to say I'm one of your favorite humans. How fantastic. It's good to be here.
Well, hopefully by the end of this episode, other people will think you're one of their favorite humans as well.
Or you might just change your mind. That might also happen by the end.
Either is an option, right?
That's true.
Joel, I'm going to kick this off just by asking the question I ask everybody. Where are you right now?
Where am I right now? Right now, I am in my studio in Melbourne, about 40 minutes east out of Melbourne. And we've just bought a house, which was super exciting, like a doer-upper about another 20 minutes east out of Melbourne. So I'm currently, where I am now is like sanding floors and filling floors and getting ready to varnish them and all that. It's a bit of a deceased estate, which we're not telling no one on the podcast. Don't tell my daughter that the old couple did die in their house. We're not.
No public disclosure whatsoever.
No, we're not going to tell my daughter that because she might freak out. But so that's where I am in terms of housing, just if you wanted to know my housing situation. But it's kind of nice right now. I'm just finishing out the year and it's been a very busy year. So it's tonight I've just done my final kind of trip away up in Sydney. I do a lot of tripping and touring and speaking. So a lot of my life revolves around a few different things. It's kind of, I'm an author, so I spend a lot of time writing. I love that practice, and I'm a poet, so and my creative practice is to write a poem every single day. So no matter what I'm doing or where I am, so I write all the time, but then on top of all that is all my speaking. And so my speaking kind of goes within both the schooling kind of world for many years. I think 16 years has been my full-time life vocation for going into schools and doing, talking to them sometimes about creativity and leadership. Sometimes I'm doing poetry workshops with them and creative writing workshops. And then I'm within kind of the more professional business corporate world as well, doing conference speaking and performing and emceeing and going into organizations. So I have my fingertips in lots of pies, let's put it like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I love.
And that's one of the things that I do love about you. And, we first met at a conference and it was in one of our industry conferences. And I'm going to go there on the day before I did one of the 15-minute slots. And I was like, I felt like it was okay. And I knew it was okay because this random stranger came up to me and was like gushing about how great it was. I was like, I felt really good. And then the next day you get up and you do a 45-minute slam poetry piece to open the entire conference. And I'm like, okay, I'm not so good anymore.
You are so good. It was brilliant.
But I actually wanted to raise that to walk into, you are unexpected as a speaker, right? You are really unexpected. And whether it's emceeing, which I've now seen, whether you're actually doing these workshops with these kids, because you actually get kids fully involved. So you are unexpected as a speaker. And you just ran us through like there's this big nexus of things that come together. What is at the core of that makes you both unexpected and compelling and grounded?
Yeah, great. So the unexpected thing is both a fantastic, wonderful thing, and also makes the business side of things
hard to sell.
Yeah, that's right, because it's unexpected. So they don't actually know, like, you can't just rock up to a professional conference and be like, yeah, I'll be your poet. That'll be great. Because most people don't have a place for that in their mind of what that looks like. And they're thinking of the bad limericks they heard at the wedding they were at the weekend. Like, the really, those really bad
I'm
poems
guessing you can do that too, though.
I can do that, but I kind of take it next level. I don't do the bad limericks, which means it does make it hard, but it also is the standout thing, right? So as soon as people see, if people can see me, then they get it, and they're moved by it, and often moved to tears by it, like. Performance poetry, I think, has this ability to go beyond the brain, the logical, which is what most people are coming into a conference or an event for. Like, they know they'll be inspired in some sense by the stories, etc., but they sit there not realizing that words can actually almost bypass the cognitive. Like most people, as I'm performing, they'll understand what I'm saying at a cognitive level, but it's going so much deeper than that, and it's hitting this heart space that opens them up, and many people are surprised to find themselves in tears through the poetry that I'm sharing. So what brings all that together for me, back to your question, what grounds that and holds that together? I think poetry for me is the thing that I've found that most resonates with people, that most gets under the skin and brings about change without someone realizing it. Let's put it like that. It's kind of a very Trojan horse inner thing. So I say I'm a poet who's into poetry, and you might have one or two hands that go up, and then I drop into it, and their defenses aren't up. And so, I mean, it's that whole idea. As soon as you're trying to present an idea to someone, if they disagree with you, their defenses are up. But if I'm just there casually sharing a poem, the defenses aren't up, and then it starts to do its deep work in them. And that's my thing. If I can change people, if I can see them, something within them, either their ideas or their feelings, change as I'm with them, that's everything I'm about.
So where does that come from? That deep desire to actually be witness to change, to bear witness to change through the words that you give?
That comes from both, in probably lots of different places in my life, right? But in terms of going far back, I grew up in kind of strong evangelical Christian world, and there's a lot of things that I'd critique about that world these days, but also there was a strong drive in that world to bring change to the world. There's a strong drive in that culture. And what that kind of translated and looks like for me over the years, I think I've very quickly realized from a young age that my life needs to be about something larger than just me. And whether for listeners that for them translates into kind of faith and Christian stuff, or whether it translates into simply the desire to bring change to the world, I think for all of us, if we can connect our individual small stories up to a larger story, then the context of our small story starts to make sense, right? So I'm thinking of a guy, one of my favorite quotes is Frederick Buechner, who is a Christian theologian that I remember from years ago, and he talks about your vocation, your calling. Your vocation should be the intersection between the world's deep hunger and your deep gladness. Like, that's where your life should be held. That's where those two things cross over: the deep hunger and thirst of this world and what the world needs, and your deep gladness, the stuff that makes you come alive and what you're passionate about. And so for me, like being a words person and a keynote speaker and a writer, where that comes in with the reality I see in this world and the stuff that I want to see change, that's where my vocation, my calling, that's where I think I plant my life and say, that's what this is about.
What is this change you want to see? Like, you talk about the change, the calling, the being witness to change, and being responsible for change, because you do talk about creativity as a responsibility. What is this change that you're driving for?
The change, I wonder if it's change both at an individual level and then also plays out at a societal level. And so at the individual level, I think we get caught up in kind of the story of our society, of the Western dream mentality, of kind of hyper individualism and consumerism, and a real, whether it's so hard in our world, because whether we want to or not, life becomes about us, because we have to live in our world, and so we have to be making money. And we know in the reality of society right now, you've got to be making a decent amount of money to even have a shelter over your head and all that kind of thing. And so yes, there's that part of it, but I think we the way I often look at it is it's almost like we have given ourselves to what I'd call kind of the anesthetic life, which is, so
Yeah.
anesthesia is the thing that deadens you, deadens
Yeah.
your senses when you go to have surgery, right? And so that you can have surgery. But I think for many of us, what happens in the grind of trying to live in Western society, we end up living that anesthetic life where our senses have been shut off, we're deadened, we just go through the motions of life, going to work because we've got to do work, etc. And so if the change that I want to see in individuals is for them to begin to live the aesthetic life, to begin to have their senses wide open and engaged with the world around them, to be present in the moment and finding life within it. And I think the more we can do that, the more present we can be to the beauty and the goodness in our own lives, then that starts to play out into society, because we realize it's when we can be present to other people and to their stories and who they are, then that for me is the remedy for every social ill, right? Is if we can listen deeper than the politics, if we can listen deeper than the opinions, than the Facebook comments, then we actually find a story sitting beneath every person. And that's part, I think, of the aesthetic life. And I talk about it often in my workshops, as like in poetry workshops. I say poetry is not about writing poetry. Poetry is about the way you see this world. Poetry is teaching you to see like a poet, to have your eyes open for the aesthetic beauty in the world, for the aching pain and the delicious hope. And it's having your ears open to the stories of others. And when we can, so I think the change I want to see is for people just to open their eyes and open their ears and feel the freedom, like living life to the full, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we hear that a lot from people, but actually we also know, so through poetry, we know how true this is, right? And that's what I've noticed a couple of times that I've heard you do this sort of work. Where did poetry, because part of, the bio that we've done in the introduction is all about, you were the third Australian, I think, to be a representative at the International Slam Poetry Competitions, and slam poetry has always fascinated me.
Yeah.
Where did poetry become your thing? Like, what was that moment where you went, oh, this is more than just me writing some stuff. This is a thing.
The big story was, which I'll shorten a little bit, was, so I was over many years ago. I was over on the border of Thailand and Burma, or Myanmar and Thailand, and doing work at an orphanage there for kids who had managed to escape across the border and come out of Myanmar. Many of them had seen their tribe killed off by the military dictatorship happening there, would come into Thailand and have no place to go. And so this lady, Mama Cat, who was a New Zealander, had started this orphanage called the Bamboo School, where kids could come in and have food and stay and have an education, etc. And so I went over there many years ago. This would be 20-something years ago now. And when I was there, about 20 years ago, I kind of entered and came into this orphanage at the same time as a mother came in, and she'd been trekking for a few days with a sick baby boy on her back, right? And as she came into the orphanage, and as I kind of entered at the same time, she realized that her baby boy had just died on her back. And so I entered into this, like, the worst moment of her life, like screaming, wailing mother, realizing that her boy had just died. And my first job then at the orphanage, I was given a shovel and told to walk up this little sandy path into this kind of bamboo grave site. And And I remember putting shovel to the ground and digging a grave for this little baby boy and burying this little baby boy. And it shattered me and my life and my worldview and my understandings. I got instantly of like angry at Western society. I got angry at the world. I got angry at God. How could there be a God who would let this happen? I like seeing kind of that abject poverty right in my face, where we can just go down to the hospital or the doctor or whatever. So and it was that night. Why I tell this story is because it was that night I remember sitting there in a little bamboo hut, just needing some way to get all the churning around out. And I put pen to paper and I started writing. And I'd been writing previously in various different ways, but not like this. This was like I put pen to paper and I just let my pen flow, and out came poetry. And as the poetry came out, I felt like I could breathe again. And so that was the moment where it became, not necessarily, that wasn't the moment where it became this public thing of, this is what I can do with my poetry. That was the moment where I realized what poetry can do within me. And probably for about a year or so after that, then it became my cathartic, became my self therapy, became my way of every time I'd hit something, I'd just put pen to paper and start writing and see what would come out. That's where it really began.
And where did you say, like, it was kind of your therapy and cathartic. Where did it start becoming something more public?
Oh, yeah. So probably maybe it was a year or so later, a student of mine sent me a YouTube link to a guy named Anis Mujgani, who's a performance poet from America, one of the American poetry slam stars, and I'd never really experienced. It was my first big experience of performance poetry before, of slam poetry, and I just remember watching it and just bawling, and it wasn't even the words, it was the experience, and and I'd always loved speaking in front of people. Like I was lecturing at that point in youth work and social work and things like that, and it was like, that is what I want to do, like to combine my love of words and the performative speaking in front of people. And so, then randomly, it was like that very week, a friend of mine was like, there's a poetry slam, performance poetry night in the city, come in. So I went along to it and was like, what, they have these in Melbourne? I can't believe this. So went along and was like, whoa, this is amazing. And then they said, we're doing another night next week. If anyone wants to perform. I'm like, I'm going to go and perform. I'm going to do it. And so jumped up and as I performed at that, like from the get-go, I remember someone coming up in tears afterwards saying that just so moved me. And it stirred something in me and did something in me. And I realized, because I'd been doing, my life had been kind of youth work and social work and helping young people with identity formation and self-understanding, which is what my studies and all that kind of stuff had been. And then I discovered this thing that was like a key that like you can go on the journey with someone for a long time and never get to some of the core stuff. And suddenly I had this thing where, I can get to some of their core stuff like in minutes. They can be, I was like, this is incredible. And so that was really like, that moment was like, this is not just for me. This is actually something that I loved being on stage and doing, but also this really changes people.
And was that when you realized that this is a calling, that this is a gift, that you had this extraordinary ability to do this?
I think that's when my calling found fruition, right? Because I always knew that there was even from my like growing up in that evangelical kind of world, which was I was at kind of a contemporary mega church kind of thing. So even as like a 15-year-old, when I was petrified of speaking in front of people and hated doing it and would chuck a sickie at school, pretend that I was sick so I didn't have to do public speaking at school, that even then I was like, no, I'm going to be a mega church preacher when I grow up. Like that was my mindset, right? I'm going to be.
So even though you didn't want to speak, you were like, I'm going to be that.
Yeah, I from a young age, I knew that I wanted to, and in my context, what it looked like was being a mega church preacher. But the idea was, I wanted to be on stage, changing people's lives
Moving
that have been
people.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, moving people that have been there from such a young age. So I think the poetry slam moments, that was the truest fruition of it, when I was like, that's how I do what I've always wanted to do. This is how I do it. This is what it's going to look like. Yeah.
So this work with youth and young adults and helping them with identity formation and all the challenges that they have to move through, then there's realization about what you could do with poetry, then ends up in, from what I can tell, and it may not be a perfect timeline, but then ends up in you being a children's book author and doing graphic novels and things like that. So I know I'm feeling like you being a children's book author, because that's always surprised me, because I love that you're actually successful in that space. But now it feels like it was just the culmination of those two things, was it?
Yeah, in some ways. I mean, part of becoming the children's author was COVID, right? So I lost
So it didn't exist before COVID.
It had existed only in me just having a play writing stories for my kids. Like,
So
I
somewhere
loved
in the laptop and read to your kids.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right. And then COVID happened, and I had a whole lot, kind of extra time, but also was homeschooling the kids. I was down here in Melbourne, so full on lockdowns, but lost 90% of my work. And so was trying to do the pivoting to online and getting online workshops up, did all that kind of stuff. But at the same time was like, this is actually a moment where I can really get into this story writing for kids stuff, because I'd loved doing it with my kids, and there was something in it, and I wanted to take that further. And so that's when I really sat and started beginning to write kids stuff.
Because you've written a few now, haven't you?
Now I have a few, yeah. So I've got my Urban Legend Hunters graphic novel series, and I've got my heist series. Here is Heist with Penguin Random House here, and I've got more coming out. I've got so that's a trilogy, and I've got a murder mystery coming out the start of next year. So I'm continually writing. I'm writing a fantasy verse novel at the moment, and I'm always right. I love fiction, and I love what fiction can do, even in the sense, like, it's another way that I think it's very Trojan horse as well, right? So it's another thing that gets into you without you realizing it. It's not someone preaching at you and your defenses come up. It's just a story that you're involved in, and suddenly you're meeting characters who you fall in love with, and then realize these characters are very different to you or have different ideas. And for kids, for any of us, like, I think the world of fiction posits a world that is different to ours. And just in doing that gets us out of our own little fish bowls, our own little stories.
I quite often say to people I was on track for a great life, and I hit 15, and then I hit life, and I was off the rails for 7 or 8 years. And I mean, chronically off, like homeless and all sorts of things. And one of the things, because I didn't finish year 11, let alone year 12, I've never gone back to university. And people sometimes, when they become aware of that background, say to me, but what was the thing? And, I think the thing for me was I was a voracious reader. So even at the worst, I was finding novels. I was finding ways to read. And I remember one of my step parents along the way was one of my stepmothers actually banned me from reading, because she said it takes you to a place that doesn't exist. And she said, and we can't reach you there. And so there's a period of time that she banned me from reading. And that was right on the precipice of me really getting this stuff together. And I always think back, and I haven't been able to articulate it until you just said it then, because it gave me a glimpse of a different world. And it gave me, and I met characters who were doing things that I wanted to be able to do, and so there's the mainstream part of it, but like you just articulated it so well. It introduces us to a world, and it's not someone lecturing, like any psychologist, counselor, youth worker trying to speak to me. I was not open to them, right? Not open to them at all. They're that voracious reader, and that comes from my mother and my grandmother. There was never enough books in the beach house, the family beach house. There was never enough books. My grandmother just, on every corner, there was stacks of books, and there was bookshelves overflowing in every room. And so it was that reading, but there was not a single fiction book around, a non-fiction book. It was all fiction.
Yes. Isn't it
all
incredible?
Fiction. I quite often look at my, and you have a faith background, so I kind of often look at my beautiful grandmother who was Puritan Wesleyan Methodist, and she was reading Gracie Mills and Boone all the time. I'm kind of like,
Of
how did
course
those
she
two go
was.
together?
I love that. That is so good.
Yeah. So thank you personally for that insight just then, because I've always believed that was the key, right? I've always believed it was the reading, but when people say they expect it to be nonfiction and they expect it to be, mindset, and they expect, but no, it was every fiction book I could get my hands on.
Yeah. It reminds, I'll tell you a story in a second. You keep on going.
No, go.
It reminds me of a few years ago, I was over in Nashville, and I was performing at a big conference over there called Story Gathering, and did what I love doing at conferences, which is listening to keynotes and writing poetry on the spot, and then jump up and perform it afterwards, about what's been happening in the moment. And I did that and had this beautiful moment where I was in tears, sharing kind of a summative moment of some of the stories that we'd heard. And this lady came up to me afterwards, and she was in tears. She was like, "That moved me so much." I said, "Oh, no worries." I said, Are you a writer too?" She said, Yeah. She said, "I write screenplays, movies." I said, "Oh, have you had any made into movies?" She said, "Yeah, I'm retiring at the moment, but I have." I said, "Oh, would I know any?" She's like, Yeah, you would." She said, "I wrote Beauty and the Beast." I was like, Sorry, what?" I said, "Are you?" Yeah. I was like, "Are you Linda Wolverton?" Because I knew of Linda Wolverton, the writer. And she said, "Yes." I was like, totally fanboy. She wrote The Lion King and Maleficent. She's like Disney royalty, right? So we got to go and hang out and spend some time together and chatting about her life, right? And she told me two things that this is what it reminded me of. She said when she wrote the character Belle for Beauty and the Beast, obviously it's the mythology fairy tale, but as she wrote it, she said, I took the stuff of my own life and I brought it into Belle. I wrote Belle as me, is what she said. And she remembered standing before the decision makers of Disney and saying, if I'm writing this, Belle's not just going to be another damsel in distress who needs to be rescued by a boy. She's going to be smart and stubborn and articulate and autonomous and independent and brave and all these things. And she's going to be a reader. She's going to walk around the town reading, because that's what Linda Wolverton loved to do, right? So, and then she said when she wrote the character Mufasa, Simba's dad, she said, I wrote Mufasa as the dad that I never had.
It's so powerful, these influences.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I said, "Oh, what do you mean?" She said, "Oh, my childhood was horrendous, a really horrible childhood." But she said, then I found stories, right? And stories is what saved me. She said, I would lose myself reading and watching movies. But she said, it was something like, I realized I wasn't just losing myself. I was actually finding myself in these fiction stories.
Just as you were saying that, I was like, when you talked about, she wrote about Mufasa for the father that she never had, and I thought there's actually a degree, I could feel there's a level of healing in that, right? Of closure, of reconciliation, of being able to create somewhere this version of what you craved.
Absolutely, it's exactly that. And for her, like in the reading of these stories and the watching of the stories, she said, I realized, like, if these characters could be brave, I could be brave too. This could be my, like, it's a rewriting, which is what story does. It rewrites our own story. And she said, and I'll never forget these words. She said, I realized, like, she got brave enough to write her own stories. And she said, I realized that I could write, in my own writing, I could write a better story for myself than the one my dad had written for me. Could write a better story for myself than the one my dad had written. And when she's like, when I heard that, I was like, that's everything that writing is, and that fiction is, and that story is. It's actually our way to take back our own story when others have tried to steal it from us and define our story by their stuff. It's our way to say, no, this is who I am, and this is the story I'm going to choose to live out of. It's incredibly powerful, right? Story.
Yes, so powerful. And what's striking me is the amount of things, and I know some of your other stories as well, but what's striking me is every time you've actually got up and told a story of any description is that it's reflected so strongly in somebody else's story that's created a connection you didn't see coming. Would that be kind of how do you feel when I say that? Because that's how it feels. So every time you actually got on stage and shared story, whether it was poetry, keynote, actual story, it feels like it generated connection points that you could not have seen coming. right?
Yes,
So you knew who
100%.
she was. I know that you've had some incredible responses just to, doing slam poetry in a cafe, for example. What is it about that opens these opportunities, that opens these connections that you can't see coming, that if we don't learn how to speak and share story, we never, ever even know exist? What is it about that? What's the elixir behind that?
Yes, I think so. They call poetry a form of half communication. And I think any speaking from the stage is a form of half communication. In other words, we're as the performer or as the speaker, we're coming halfway to the audience and we're offering them our story, but we can only come halfway, right? It's actually they're the ones who are coming the other half and they are stepping forward. And this is the space that we want to create as speakers. This is the that kind of connection, that kind of brave enough space, safe enough space that people feel like they can step into our story, bringing their story with them. And that's where the magic lies. It's at that halfway point between the story that I'm sharing or that comes out of my heart and my life and my passions. And it's the story that it's stirring within them. And I have no control over that. So part of it is actually this very humble thing of letting it go and saying, whatever this needs to be for someone, I don't need it to be what it was for me. But that meeting place, that's where the elixir and the magic is. And part of that then, and this is a huge part of creativity for me, of any kind of creativity, of speaking and of writing poetry, so much part of then is learning how to listen well to that other half of the story. And part of seeing the world as a poet and hearing the world poetically is learning how to listen deeply to what's actually happening for someone as they're sharing about their life, about whatever circumstances might be on the surface level, but all this deeper stuff is happening. And I think what I have done and sought to do for a long time is to train myself how to listen at a deeper level so that then I can take what I'm hearing and the heart of it and bring it into my messages, bring it into my speaking, bring it into my performance poetry. And it creates the open door for that meeting place of the two stories to happen. Learning how to listen well to people. Like that's why I can, as we said, sit in a conference and sit there writing poetry based on what I'm hearing and seeing happen. Like that, I can only do that because for years I've trained myself to listen for what's really happening, for the underneath story. And that I think is where the magic is. Yeah.
I really love that expression you just used, with the place where two stories meet. I think we're going into a boot camp in the next few days here, and I think I'm going to take that in, because I quite often talk about, you've heard me talk about, stories need to have a universality so that other people can, it's not about your story, but the emotion, so people can meet you there. And that was what I spoke about that day before I realized you were brilliant in my presence. But it's that is what I think is so important in stories, is your story is a vehicle to create an emotional visceral reaction in somebody else. And so that expression of that, you had a really interesting way of building the discipline of listening deeply. Can you share that with us? Like actually how you deliberately build and continue to build that muscle?
Yeah, sure. So it actually began for me, well, how many years ago now? Maybe about 12 years ago now, on a random day off in Montreal, over in Canada. My touring friend and I, there's a bunch of stuff that happened that day, but one of the things that happened that day is we went to, we were kind of like, what are we going to do on our day off as poets? Let's go write poetry. And we saw in the Airbnb we were at, or we're at whatever we were at, there was a typewriter. And so we thought, let's go down to kind of the famous park where everyone hangs out under the mountain in Montreal, and let's sit and offer takeaway poetry, right? So people would come and share some of their story with us, and we'd say, come back in 10 minutes and we'll have a poem written for you, and we'd give it to them. So it was kind of a busking thing to start with, of let's just see what happens. This will be fun. And I remember that day, one of the ladies that I wrote a poem. She just shared, I can't even remember exactly what the story was, but there was there was grief in it, and there was loss, and I wrote a poem and read it back out loud to her and gave it to her as a gift, and she just bawled. It just moved her so deeply, and I realized in that moment, like, this magic of listening, not even the magic of I realized what both listening to a very specific story and then drawing that specific story up into the universality, into this is her specific story, is mirrored in kind of the archetypal longings that we have as humans, and bringing that into the poetry. And I wouldn't have been able to phrase it at that point what I was actually doing, but what this essentially led to, I was like, this I loved doing. I loved sitting here listening to story and writing. I was like, maybe I should do this more. So I actually started from that moment. I started writing poetry for people. And so literally once a week, there's been some weeks that I've missed, but once a week since then, for the last 12 years of my life, I've tried to write a poem for somebody each week and give it to them. And so it's that process, really, like, that's what's taught me how to listen, is that I'm listening, yes, for kind of the plot level of whatever story they're telling me. And sometimes often it's not me saying, tell me some of your story and I'll write you a poem. It's more like I'm having a conversation with someone, and the little fluttering of feathers, of bird feathers, of intuition, of whatever, is like, this is the moment. Then I sink into myself, and I listen, at that deeper level beyond plot, as to I'm listening for a few things. I'm listening for the metaphors that might come out as a poet, playing on those metaphors. I'm listening for the meta, like that universality, that archetypal stories of pain or loss or love, or whatever that archetypal thing is. And I'm listening for the story beyond, kind of, if plot is the surface level, then story is something deeper than that. Story is it's the way we take the plot and the chaos of life and make meaning out of it. So I'm listening for the meaning making kind of language, the story language, where they've faced conflict and wrestle, which is what story is. A pattern disrupted is what someone calls it. What's that name? I forget. Someone that I can't attribute to right now, but that was the thought that came. Stories like this conflict. And so I'm listening at the level of story. I'm listening at the level of the metaphor. I'm listening at the level of the meta, and the level of what's unspoken as well for people. And as I do that, so one of the most beautiful experiences of doing this, I was invited, a good friend of mine is a lady who runs the Babes Project, which is an organization for women going through crisis pregnancy of some kind, to come alongside and support them, whether it's because of abuse, whether it's a teenager who's been kicked out of home because they fell pregnant, or whatever it might be. And I was invited to come in and spend some time. My kind of role was to I'd go in with Helen, who runs the thing, and sit with some of these ladies who had just gone through the program and were kind of coming out the other end so their baby was probably a year old or something like that, and they'd been through the whole thing. And to sit with them, and Helen would ask them questions and talk about their story, and I would write as this was happening, and we would gift them then back as their kind of leaving moment. This is your story in poetic form of what you just shared with us. And I'd share kind of the initial first draft in that moment. And every single one, they just burst into tears as their story was mirrored back to them, the things that they couldn't see about themselves, right? So that they had struggled through this whole massive ordeal and moment in their life and come out the other end. And so speaking to their incredible bravery, their incredible strength, the stuff that we can't see of ourselves for all the different reasons, we can't see the good things within us, to mirror that back to someone. And it's quite incredible what it can do. They were moved to tears every time. And so then and I'll still because I've been doing this for so long, I'll still go into people's houses, right? And the poem that I wrote for them 10 years ago is stuck to their mirror. And they say, Joel, I read this every day before I go to work still, because it speaks to me of who I am. Like that. Wow. I get emotional just thinking about it.
That depth of emotion and resonance and viscerality and what you bring to people. What was the most challenging part about taking that from writing poetry for people to actually speaking on a stage and creating that same sort of impact? What was it? What was the shifting gears you had to do to be able to actually, because a lot of people try to take their offstage skill onto stage and it just doesn't
Yes.
quite work. So what was
Yeah.
the big shift you had to do to actually be able to transition that and not lose integrity in either?
Yeah, I mean, I'd already, in terms of the stagecraft of things, I'd already been performing for a long time. So I didn't have that transition that I needed to make. I knew how to take a vulnerable piece of my own and perform it, share it in a way that would move people and call them forward in something in their life as well. And so with this, though, I think what I learnt through so much of this is it's that whole kind of adage that that specificity leads to universality. That the more specific we can get in terms of someone's story and speaking to it, actually that's what draws people into their own story and to the larger story, the universal, the archetypal, the whatever it might be. And so if I'm writing poetry that's just playing around the edges of pain and suffering and talking about it as an abstract term and that kind of thing, then it just stays general for people and a thought process. But if I can zero in on a very specific story and bring that, and as a writer and as a poet, it's specificity in terms of the five senses and like it's inviting. What I always say is don't just share a poem, don't just tell a story, invite people into the experience of it by using some of the specificity that we can. And then as people do that, as people are invited into the moment, to experience the moment, to see and to smell and to hear, that then is actually the more specific you can get, as we said. And I don't even know how this happens or what happens, but it's like perhaps it's the Trojan horse thing again. Like it just opens them up to what's really happening for them and opens them up to what the poem is really about beneath the story of the poem, beneath the story that I'm sharing on stage for a keynote. There's the deeper thing, like, this is actually about being brave. This is about my passion and purpose in life. They're never going to get to this is about bravery and I can feel brave now, or this is about my passion and my purpose in life and what I'm here for, unless we take them through the specific, through the story, through the listen to. So I think this process of writing and listening, that's really what it taught me so much better how to do.
Yeah, I really love that. It's actually, and for those listening, it's there may be some people thinking, well, it's all right, Joel, you're creative and you're a poet and you've got this gift with words. And so I'm going to bring one of your own quotes that, like, if we go and research Joel McKerrow, we see it everywhere, which is creativity and story are too important to be left only to the creators. And in that, I think, number one, I want to know exactly where that comes from and what you mean behind those words. And then also what that means for people who are listening, who are going, I'm not as creative as Joel. I can't do this. I don't know how to write a poem, what it means for them. Can we go there?
Yeah, totally. Let's start with what it means for them, because I think I think creativity for me comes out of listening. It comes out of listening to the inside life and what is churning around inside you. A guy named Henry Rollins calls it our aching pain and our delicious hope, that every single one of us has both aching pain and delicious hope roaming around inside us. And our job is not to let go of either, but to listen to and hold on to both. And as humans, bring that out in some way. And that's what a creative does. That's what a poet does, but that's what any of us can do. And that's why I say this is not just for the archetypal creative, the artist, the poet, the painter, because all of us have the ability to listen to what's happening on our inner life and on our inside and say, one of the things I often do in workshops, and it's amazing what happens just from this little exercise, is I say, so if you listen to your inner life and you said, all right, and using our five senses, what would your inner life be if you could see it? If you could see it as a place, a setting, a landscape, what would it be? Would it be a flowing river right now? Would it be a swamp? Would it be a desert? And I want you to put yourself in that landscape and just describe it for me. And just doing that, like that's something any of us can do, right? And just doing that, it's not just for the poets, people write and instantly they're like, holy crap, what just happened then? I just wrote a thing. I just entered into this space and something creative come out of me. And I decided long ago that I wasn't a creative person. But now there's this creative thing sitting in front of me. And so this listening both to the inner life and then listening to the outer world around us, and these listening skills that I've been talking about of listening what's happening at a deeper level, it can take a little bit of training to catch ourselves and go, what's this person actually saying? Let me listen, let me lean in closer and listen deeper. But any of us can do that. Any of us can do that. And it translates into poetry for me, because that's just how I engage, but it doesn't have to translate into poetry. It translates into a keynote speaker who shares, talking about inspiration, talking about resilience, talking about whatever they want to be talking about. These practices, the creative practices, they can't just be for the creative. They are the thing, I think, putting it out there, they're the thing that I think that every single one of us need to take us further. Because they forces, so every day I show up and I write a poem, every single day for the last 12 years of my life. And it forces me to put a mirror in front of my face, to do that self-reflection, to go, oh, that's what I feel like. That's where I'm at. That's what's happening. Let me unpack that experience I just had through poetry. If we all do that, the world will be a much better place, because most of us are not being self-reflective at all.
If we were to all do that just in the speaking world, I think we've rid the world of shitty speakers as well. Can I go there?
Yes.
Well, let's
I
go
think
there.
we would. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, because we'd be realizing our own ego within our speaking careers, which all of us have, right? And so we'd be challenging those diva notions within us.
Yeah, diva notions, they don't exist, do they?
No, not at all. Not at all.
What has there been a time when a poem felt too honest and too vulnerable to share?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of poetry that I don't share, and there's the poetry. Every poem I write, I start off to write for me. Someone said our creative, I don't know who it was, someone said our creative practices need to have lonely childhoods. Like, it's just you, because I think if I immediately start writing for other people, then that does something. Straight away, I am masking in some sense. Like, even if I'm trying to be honest and authentic, I'm masking in some sense. So what I do always is I show up and even if it's a commissioned poem, right? If it's a commissioned poem that's about something, I need to tap into my own feelings about that. So I don't even worry about any of that. I just write it for me. What do I want to write about? A sense of belonging. What do I want to write about? And I just start writing. And so I think, yeah, if I can write that initial first draft for me, and then from there decide, all right, is this something that I can take and craft and work on and make it into something that goes into a book or something that I perform on stage in some kind of way or bring into a keynote? Then I'll go, okay, let me look at this with the editing lens, and there might be some stuff in this that I want to take out because it's my personal life. Like, I'm very vulnerable and authentic on stage, but the stage is not therapy for me. My book is my therapy. Otherwise we're asking too much of our audience, right? Where I don't think we should be bleeding on the stage. I think we should be showing our scars on the stage. Like, it's that kind of idea.
I'm very big about, you shouldn't speak about something until you can speak about strength, power, and grace. And I will tell people not to speak about things that if they're still in the middle of it. What I love there, though, is for me, you really nailed what a creative practice is. It's not all on the stage. It's not all on the internet. It's all that lonely childhood thing really feels strongly. It's also one of the things we do when we're working with someone who's doing their first ever speech. We have a strategy called Blue Apple, and it surprises people because it's, 6 questions that we have to get answered to create your through line, or else we know that it won't hold up. And we do the first thing is just what, the topic, who's this for, broad terms. And the third question gets people by surprise because we've been taught that everything's about the audience. But I make them dig really deep into why this matters to them and not the market speak, and it surprises people that we're going there first. I'm like, no, you have to go there first, because how can you create resonance if you can't drop into your own heart space on this? And so that's part of our kind of, I guess, streamlined creative process is I get people to go there first. And then we go to what I call Y squared, which is when, okay, now what does it matter to your audience? But if you don't go here first, you can't connect with them, which is exactly what I just heard in that process you talked about.
100%. And it's the massive issue with our social media saturated world, right? Is that too many of us are going to a level within us to share something authentic on social media, when really we should be going a whole lot deeper in us and not sharing it on social media. And then after a while, picking out and working, okay, what do I want to share of this in my socials world? So I think we are skipping the process. We're skipping it. And we're doing it in lots of different ways. I think AI, we can get onto that in a second if you want, but I think AI skips the process in us as well that we need to go on. The creative process forces us on this journey, and both social media and palming our stuff off to AI, I think, halts the inner journey that needs to happen for this to really change us and move us first before it then goes out to the world in some way.
I really love this. We, as I mentioned a couple of times, we've got a boot camp we're about to walk into, and I actually tell people they're not allowed to touch Google, their laptops, their files, anything. Right. Yep. And especially now, it challenged people 10 years ago when I first did it, but now it really challenges people. But it's also touching on the AI thing. What I've noticed is we get people to a certain point, and then no matter who they are, they use AI to tidy it up. And, for the first time ever in a program recently, I had to get everyone to tie up their, what we call FSDs, their first shitty draft. And they're said that way for a reason, because they're not supposed to be perfect. Right. But everyone got their FSD done and then use AI to clean it up in their voice. I'm like, but now you've lost it. And I can feel it. And it may not sound much difference, but I can feel it. Right. And I think we're outsourcing. And somebody said it perfectly at an event I was at recently. They said AI is teaching us what to say, but doesn't let us learn.
So good. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I don't know that we need to unpack it, because from my perspective, it's like if you want to keep creative genius, stay away from it. Use it to research, use it to deep plumb, use it to summarize. Don't use it to write.
Yeah.
Right?
Use it to figure out the right way to sand your floors.
Yes. And get those bloody nails out.
That's exactly right. Yeah. It's the whole like, the way overused cliche saying of it's about the journey, not the destination. Like AI is the destination, right? You put in your little prompt and it comes out, and you don't have to go on the journey, but it truly is the journey that changes you. And we're missing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Going to creativity is obviously your stronghold, right? It's your strong ground. Okay. We've touched on, and I'm about to read your book on faith, which is Woven, and I can't wait to get started on that. And we kind of touched on, you were raised in that evangelical Christian childhood, and then belief literally deconstructed for you, right? And there was a redefining, a reforging of what you believed. And that's a real wrestle. How did creativity hold you when belief felt fragile? Especially because belief had been such a strong part of your early raising. One of the first visions of being on stage was a mega church pastor. So and you kind of are still doing that. Let's be honest. It's like when people are breaking in the aisles and they're crying spontaneously. But literally, how did this high level of creativity actually hold you when belief felt fragile?
Yeah, such a great question. I had this beautiful moment in the midst of when kind of faith and my whole background and my whole cultural upbringing was kind of falling apart and deconstructing or unraveling is what I talk about in that book, Woven, where I was walking along a river one day and along Warrandyte River here in Melbourne, and there's a little secondhand bookshop. And I had this whether you want to say intuitive feeling, and Christians would say it was a little prophetic God speaking to me, whatever it might be. I had this moment where and I know it's going to sound super strange, but I had this moment where I'm walking past this bookshop and I'm like, there's a book in the back room on the bottom left that has an orange cover that I'm meant to have. It was like this. I just knew it. So I walked into the bookshop, walked to the back room, looked down. There was a little book, and the little book is it's inside. Otherwise, I'd get it for you right now. The little book was John O'Donohue, who's a Celtic, incredible Celtic poet writer. Was a priest maybe way back in the day. Incredible Irish writer. And he actually, I didn't find this out till later, but it was about the time that I picked up this book. That same year was the same year that he passed away. I picked up this book, opened, it's called Eternal Echoes. I forget the subtitle, something about longing and belonging. But I literally carried that book around with me for the next 3 years. It became like a Bible to me, right? It's the most dog-eared, written, scribbled all over. And it was this beautiful Celtic, poetic, lyrical writing about life and about faith and about the world and God and beauty and all of the things. And I remember that day I picked up this book. I was like, okay, I don't know who this dude is, but this is the book I'm meant to have. So I bought it and I went and sat by the river. I opened it and I just cried and I cried and I cried. And then it didn't leave my side for a long time. And it was in this book it was in his writings. I was like, what has been before, I don't feel like I can be a part of that cultural world anymore. But this is who I am. This is so much who I am. And so much of the kind of Celtic faith, Celtic spirituality he was taught. I was like, this is all the things that I've believed and held onto and had been me for such a long time, but had no place for it. I thought it was just weird, strange things. And it has a home. Like, that's what I realized. Like, it has a home, and I have a home, and I have a people and a tribe, and this creative, deep spirit. And so then went on a journey of finding other people, right, who wrote in similar traditions. Mary Oliver is this beautiful American poet who died just a few years ago as well, writing very specific, as in specificity again, poetry about the world. And she'd take a book into the forest every day and write about bears and ants and then link these things to the human condition. And in his writing and then in her writing, I found, it was like Linda Woolverton saying she found herself. I found myself in that writing, and I found my faith. I found I found who I could be in this world and how I could hold these things together, the unraveling of what had been, the glimpses of what could be. And in the kind of holding this together, I'd already been writing poetry and that kind of stuff, of course, but this took it to this whole deeper level. This took it to this level of, this is my way to sit in the midst of all the unraveling parts of my life and find a way through it. And so then, then once again, whether it was that moment in Thailand, whether it was this moment of reading this poetry, just over and over and over and over again, then it's become my way to process through life and faith and my journey and who I am, just for me to start with, as we said, before I then bring it out into the world in any kind of way.
When you walk through that and the depth of that and the willingness to sit in the mess is also something I think we're missing in this beautiful life that we're now creating. you have this creative gift, the poetry, the words, the authorship, being on stage. But also, as you mentioned earlier, we live in the real world. We have to, be commercial. We have to do things. How have you balanced the art and the creative in you with business and commerciality and commercial realities? And how do you not lose yourself in either side of that?
Yes. Yeah, really good. I think, well, first thing that comes to mind is that saying that that most good things in life are a tension to balance, not a problem to solve. And I think that this is one of those things.
Haven't heard that before, but I'm taking it with me.
Yeah. I think most things in life are most important things in life. There's no solution for it. There's no answer. There's just the journey. There's just the tension. There's just the manner. And sometimes I fall too much to either side. But what I hope to do and what I try to do is to hold both the business side of things and the bringing it out into the world and the professional side of things with the authentic journey that creativity takes me on. Part of that, as we said, I think is my very intentional choice to give my first drafts Lonely Beginnings, to sit there and make them just for me. And then there's that next intentional choice that, okay, now this has been for me, but now I need to work out what's all the static that lies between this piece, well, a story, a poem, or whatever it is, and someone else's ears. And my job as a speaker, as a poet, is to clear the static away. And
I love that.
Yeah, both in terms of the on the stage static, the communication, but then in terms of branding, like all the business side of things, right? How do I communicate what I want to communicate?
Static. It's the static. It's the static. I love that.
Yeah. How do I take what I want to communicate and communicate it well in a way that one that will improve my career and my business? How do I remove all that's blocking that as well? So that, and this is where we started, I think, when I said, like, it's hard to communicate what a poet or a creative keynote speaker can do. We've all organizations are like, yeah, we're a creative organization. You say, so what's your training through the creative process? Like, how do you actually do that? Crickets, right? Like, everyone wants an organization to be creative because that's the value you're meant to have and they want it to be, but no one's actually training their people to go through a creative process. And so part of my work is, how do I take that message and brand it and brand myself in a way that people will be able to go, that's what we need. We need that within our organization. And that's hard to do. It's hard to do with creativity, to be honest.
Yeah. I love that. And one of the reasons we were at both an event in Sydney recently where you were MC, and one of our most favorite speakers in Australia, Peter Merritt, delivered an extraordinary day. Yeah. And experience. And we also had Doug Lipp, who was the head of Disney University for quite some time. And one of the reasons why I didn't even hesitate, I think it was one of the first tickets to be bought when it was released, was there was a period of my life where I was actually going into organizations and teaching them the Disney creative strategy.
Right. Yeah.
Which is, the 4 roles, the 4 spaces, the deliberate, friction and all that sort of stuff. And so for about 2 or 3 years, alongside what I did, I was actually going in as well and running workshops for the Disney strategy, which is one of the reasons why I was so excited that he was there. But also what you just said about, organizations say, yeah, we're creative. And it's like, the minute you say, what are you doing with that? It's like, yeah, not a lot.
Not a lot. Yeah.
And it's not just not a lot. It's like, we don't actually want it.
That's absolutely right, because the creativity disrupts the status quo of
what we're doing. Joel, just for a moment before, because I have to wrap up in just a moment, but one of the things I kind of wanted to ask you about as well is, slam poetry competitions are intense, right? And you played on the big stages with that. What did they teach you about both pressure and presence?
Ooh, this is a good question that I haven't thought of for a while. So slam poetry, the whole idea of it is you need to move the audience straight away. Otherwise, they're not going to care. So slam poetry being the competition side of performance poetry. So you go in and you've got 3 minutes to And normally it's just 5 random judges selected from the audience who then judge.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. In many of them, it's 5 random judges that are chosen, because within slam poetry world, we say you don't need to be a poetry expert to know what moves you. And so it's that anyone, no matter who the random people, they can be poetic judges. They know what moves them. They know what stirs them. And so immediately with slam poetry, the idea in 3 minutes, you have to move someone. And if you don't, you're not going to, not that it was, and this is a part of it, is not that for me it was ever about winning competitions. It becomes that, especially when you go to America, to the individual poetry slam championships. They've got their slam strategy and this is how I'm going to win. But for me, it taught me that in a very, and this is what poetry is always trying to do, right? Is take big ideas and make them as succinct as possible, and as punchy and powerful as possible by taking out lots of stuff. So I think slam poetry taught me how to take out the fluff and bring it down to kind of the very specific, as articulate, as succinct as I can. If I can say this and move people in two lines rather than 10 lines, then let me try to do that and see if I can bring about that same punch, which I think is something really incredible and important to take into then the keynote speaking world as well, right? Is that succinct nature of how can I draw what I'm trying to say into a little something that would stir people and resonate with them, and either create resistance or resonance inside them. Either way, the same good stuff can happen through resistance or resonance if we can help them with that. So yeah, I think that's really what it taught me, those competitions, is how to do that, how to draw it down, and bring as much punch as I could.
Yeah. The other thing that I know poetry is as well, and you are masterful at this, is that kind of that silence, the pauses, the pacing, the rhythm. And that's something that we don't get a lot of in speakers, especially as they're starting to emerge into the industry. So what do they underestimate about the power of that? What's one thing you wish they understood about that?
Oh yeah, stagecraft is incredibly important. I think for me, it's kind of what we always say with performance poetry is, don't tell me your poem, show me your poem. And what I do in workshops when I'm doing specific performance poetry workshops is I say to them, and sometimes when I've got the space, I'll do it with them and say, I want you to share your poem with me, but you're not allowed to actually say it audibly. And I need to know, I should know where your poem is at by your body presence, just the presence of your body and what is happening in your articulation without the content, without the words. So I always think about it as, when I'm sharing a poem, I'm not just reading a poem, I'm inviting someone into the moment. And I invite them into the moment through the use of things like dynamics and pausing and pacing and rhythm and breath, which I think the only way you really get to those things is the out loud practice. That's the only way that it comes. So anyone who is...
You can't write your way into it.
No, that's right. Yeah. So most of my driving life is me spent practicing, going over and over and over. Poetry is a little different in the sense that I am memorizing word by word, and that I don't think we should do that necessarily. There could be parts of a keynote that you do have fully memorized, but I think like knowing your story and being able to ad-lib it, but it's still being able to get the right, even if you're ad-libbing and not memorizing a whole thing, it's still, there should be certain parts, certain phrases that you do have totally memorized, right? That are the punchy, this is where I bring it to, and this is where I bring it to, and this is where I bring it to. So I am out loud over and over and over and over and over and over again. I'll be going over poems consistently over and over and over again until I perform, and then I'm still doing it. And those poems change as I do them over the years as well. The more I perform them out loud, they change. I drop parts out, I change things, and it adapts to the audience and all that kind of thing. But I think that discipline, that practice, where you just want to write a thing and think, oh yeah, this will be fine. I'm one of those speakers who just ad libs. I just go for it. Yes, do that. But you need to know. So what I love to do is I know my craft, and I've practiced it so well that if I'm going through a poem that I have fully memorized and my brain goes off and I don't know what the next thing is, I know that I can ad lib poetic style like,
because
and I
the
can
foundation, but the foundation
totally,
is there, right? And that's,
totally,
so
yeah,
people, we teach people how to script because most people don't know how to tell story, don't know how to deliver moments, don't know how to bring things. So it's the scripting that we do is not about you being able to memorize. It's actually teaching you a new way, laying down the neural pathways of a new way of speaking. And what I really, really say to people all the time is we can get that script 100% right and 80% ready. But that last 20% is the hardest because you actually got to put it in the arena. You got to listen to it. You got to say it out loud. You got to get it. It's a contact sport, right?
yes.
And so we can be 100% right and 80% ready. And what you just said then just brings it home because it's got to have contact with the enemy, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah, it really does. I mean, it's like I was just at a PSA event last night with Jordana Borenstein, who's a comedian, right? And it's the same as comics going and performing, doing stand-up comedy routines and trying out their new bits so that they can figure out what's landing and what's not. And the best comics in the world would go to tiny little dingy comedy clubs and suddenly you'll have someone rocking up who's incredibly famous, do their pieces and figuring out as they go what's working with the audience and what's not. And whether we have we may not have an audience and be able to do that before we go to a conference and speak or whatever it is, but we have the audience of us, whether it's to a mirror, whether it's sitting in your car as you're driving, out loud, and being honest with yourself as you do so and going, oh, that felt clunky as I did that. Let me go back and just keep on going over this and smooth it out. What was clunky about that? Let me change that little part of it. And then out loud over and over again is incredibly important.
Yeah, amazing. Joel, we're going to have to wrap it up. I've just got a few questions.
Oh,
to
this
bring
is
home.
fun though. I'm enjoying this.
I know. I could talk to you all day. I'm like, how do I get you more in my world? And we're going to do that.
Yes.
There's a couple of questions I just want to ask to bring it home. And there's all these parts of Joel McKerrow, which all come back to words, right? Word and emotive and viscerality. But there's all these parts of Joel. So when you actually think about where you're moving to, if you think about the fully evolved version of Joel as you get more and more into your work, what do you see?
I was thinking about this recently as I more and more am moving into kind of professional world and business speaking world. And my question was, how do I retain who I have been in the creative world and go into sometimes particularly dry rooms of corporates, let's just put it like that. How do I retain this thing? And that the more I've been thinking about it, I'm like, I need to be living like the integrated life, right? Integrated rather than divided. I need to be allowing these parts of myself that feel uncomfortable in corporate world, like that passion and zeal and excitement and the creative and the poetic is not what you immediately think of when you think of corporate world. But like that's what makes me stand out in terms of, as you said, the unexpected and the what does Seth Godin call it? The blue cow at the side of the road. Purple cow. I was thinking your blue, whatever your blue thing was before. That's what got in my head. Yeah. Blue apple, purple cow, all of the colors. The thing that is both a part of that scene, but is so different. Like, whoa, was that a blue cow? What sort of purple cow? Yeah. Whatever the color is.
Blue apple.
So for me moving forward, I think it is, it's the undivided life. It's the integrated life where what I'm hoping for and what I'm seeking to do is to bring all these parts of myself together onto the stage in any moment that I am who I am, whether I'm obviously the change of context means I change how I perform and speak to people, but I still can be who I authentically am on the stage, no matter who the audience is, and bring it and just bring my fullness that I bring to a room. I want to bring that in everything that I'm doing. So I think that maybe that's a strange way of saying it, but I think the integrated, undivided life where who I am off stage and on stage is I mean, they're going to be different, of course, because you're not performing, but do you get what I mean? Like just
Yeah, totally.
holding all these
Holding
parts of
that.
myself together.
And there's a tension that, like before we were talking about holding the tension rather than solving the problem, there's a
Yeah.
tension in holding that, especially in some of these arenas that you're now starting to move into. Is that the creative mountain that you're preparing to climb next? What is the next creative mountain for Joel?
Oh, I have lots of creative mountains. I love creative mountains. And I'm the kind of person who, in terms of even like, I have many projects on the go at the same time, whether it's me figuring out my next keynote speaking thing at the same time. As I said, I'm writing verse novels and fantasy novels. I'm working with another friend on a novel. I am writing poetry that I want to bring together as another album, a poetry album with some musicians. I have a plethora of creative mountains, which for me means that why I love that is because I hit the blockage in one and I just turn to the other for a little bit and work on this thing. And then I turn to another, I work on this thing. And then I've figured out as I'm working on these other things and I've figured out my way forward with the thing I was blocked on. Yeah. So I'm definitely not someone, as you can probably tell throughout all of this, who has like the one thing that I do, either out in the world or in my creative projects. I have a plethora of things, and I think that, but I have the personality that can handle that. Like, I'm not the person who has 50 things and never finishes any of them. I have 15 things, and every single one of those I know that I will finish. Like I have that discipline and that practice to sit there and write the book when I don't want to be writing the book, but I know that I have to have that discipline. And that's part of it as well, right? So much part of what we have to do is it's not forcing ourselves, it's creating the disciplined practices that will get us to where we want to go, because we're never going to get there if it's just a desire. It has to be matched by our practice, by becoming a master of the craft.
You just actually answered the question, because I was about to jump in then and say, how important is discipline? Because I think it's everything, right? I think it's absolutely everything. And I think people don't relate expression. So speaking, creativity, poetry, whatever it might be, they kind of don't relate it to discipline. And one of the conversations I'm always having is it gives you the foundation, right? Discipline gives you the foundation to be more creative, to be more spontaneous, to be more, and it's really hard to explain that to people unless they're actually understanding it. But the cost of no discipline is actually quite often failure, right? Failure
It's
to
quite
launch,
often,
failure
yes,
to
that's
engage,
right.
failure to, and so I love that you went there. Last question. If all your books, all your albums, all your poems, everything you've written till now disappeared overnight?
Jeez.
Finish the question yet? Obviously, I just struck your heart. But if all of that disappeared overnight, what do you hope people would say Joel McKerrow left behind?
Like, just immediately, all the faces come to mind of the students and the people that I've worked with over the years, adults and students who, the ones who have come up to me afterwards and just said, "Oh, you just either made me feel not so lonely anymore, because I feel like this is who I am, but I've never been able to express it," or have said, I've never been able to articulate this, whether it's a point of grief or a whatever. I want people, if everything else I did physical disappeared, it's the people who have been, and we're back to the start again, the people who have been so changed by my work that their life is different because of the little bit that I was able to add to it, the little bit that I was able to open their eyes a bit, open their heart a bit. If that's what I left, then I think that would be a wonderful legacy. Yeah.
Joel, I think you just expressed what I think everyone in this public domain who's speaking to impact people should actually keep as their North Star. Thank you so much for being with us today.
It's been wonderful. Thank you for having me. It's been so good.